In the most brutal war in human history, how much change can a person achieve as an ordinary soldier, experiencing a heart-stirring period of courage, responsibility, mission, family, friendship, sacrifice. This article takes the armored soldiers of two countries during World War II as the main characters, following them step by step towards the battlefield. Experienced the era of war and chaos. Keywords of the novel. Target 700 meters without pop-ups, target 700 meters. Download the complete set of TXT, target 700 meters. Read the latest chapters. Chapter 1. Forgotten Glory. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1 Forgotten Glory. There has never been a good war, nor has there been a bad peace. Franklin, Indiana 2005, Nizhny Novgorod, Russia. The sunshine warms the entire city, and the warm air spreads the fragrance of flowers throughout the city. People start a new day's work on a fulfilling and busy morning, and everything is so peaceful and warm. On the edge of the city, there is an old apartment leaning against the garden behind it. The sunlight shines on the balcony and spreads on the floor. An elderly man in his 50s sits on the sofa, watching everything beautiful. The living room is filled with noise, and the old man stands up and slowly walks towards it. "Little Nicholas, what are you doing?" The old man walked towards a 9-year-old boy who was fighting in front of the computer with a smile. The boy turned around and laughed mischievously. "I'm driving a tank. Look, I just destroyed an enemy tank." He then turned his face and continued to gallop on the battlefield. The old man smiled and caressed the boy's head, looking at the computer screen. It was a vast grassland, dotted with various tanks, fighting against each other. The sound of engines, artillery, and shouting mixed together. The old man saw the little boy operating a fierce steel monster, charging back and forth among a group of tanks. After a while, he destroyed several tanks. "Is that a German tank?" the old man asked intentionally when he saw it. "Yes. That's the strongest tank in World War II. He can defeat 100 enemies, he's my ace." The little boy continued to drive his tank without looking back to attack the enemy's defenses. After a while, the little boy seemed to notice something, so his eyes moved away from his ace and he turned to face the old man. "Grandpa Andre, how do you know that's a German tank? Have you also played this game?" The old man laughed and said, "I've played more than that. Back then, I was driving the kind of tank you destroyed all the way west to Berlin." In the computer screen, the little boy left the operation and his ace was instantly surrounded by a group of pale green painted tanks. Under their joint attack, his ace was torn to pieces by several pale green tanks. The old man smiled and revealed a row of shiny medals wrapped in his coat, while saying to the little boy, "Look, these are all honors obtained through the tanks I drove." The little boy's eyes were straight as he looked, and the rows of shining golden medals were particularly dazzling in the sunlight. "Grandpa, you have been to the battlefield before. Can you tell me the stories you told on the battlefield back then?" After listening, the old man took off his coat, revealing his capable military uniform. It seemed that he had never taken it off before, but the military uniform was spotless. "Child, war is not what you see on that glowing box. War is the disappearance of countless lives, and victory is obtained through the lives and blood of countless martyrs." The old man sighed and said to the little boy. The old man's gaze shifted to the intense battle scene on the screen, and the scattered chariots on the vast grassland reflected into the old man's turbid pupils. Suddenly, a faint light flashed through his eyes, which was born in the spark-splattering steel furnace, shining on the battlefield filled with gunpowder, but dissipated like hot and dazzling steel after quenching. A slight muscle twitched on the old man's face, accompanied by the roar of the engine, the collision and friction of steel, and the roar of artillery fire. At this moment, the earth seemed to tremble with the heartbeat of the tank. The rows of sparkling metals on his chest collided with each other, emitting a crisp jingling sound, as if telling the story of his master's bloody battle against the invaders on every land of his once great motherland. The old man's pupils became increasingly clear, and his deep blue eyes reflected the thin dividing line in the sight that was aimed at the enemy. That was in 1942, when we received orders to defend a farm outside the city and prevent fascist aggression against our motherland. Ski Pan. Hurry up and load the high explosive shells. The fascist bastards are about to attack the first line of defense. Got it, loading. 1 o'clock direction, infantry target, 200 meters, fire. Bang. Dingling. The shell was fired, and smoke accompanied the shell as it bounced out of the barrel, Andre. At 11 o'clock, the German tank is approaching the second line of defense, 500 meters away, Andre. At 12 o'clock, the infantry have entered the defense line. What the fuck are you doing? Skipan observed around the observation hole, and a large number of Germans flooded into his field of vision. Don't rush, Skepan. The steering gear is running out of oil. It's not rotating fast. I moved my eyes off the main gun sight, opened the steering gear refueling port, grabbed the nearby oil pot, poured half of it randomly, covered it, and moved my eyes back to the sight. I aimed the aiming line at the German tank that was raging on the defense line in the distance. Bang! Dingling! The smoke dissipated, and at a distance of 500 meters, the shell charged towards the German tank with a dazzling arc. Damn it. The advance of the shells is not accurate. The shells fell to a distance of about 1 meter behind the German tank, and he was still bouncing around. Skipan quickly loaded another shell. He was preparing to fire another shot. Attention all armor. Attention all armor. Immediately move out of position and block the protruding fascist tanks in the northwest direction. Charge for our motherland, the captain's command came through the radio. All right, Andre, don't worry about him. Follow the 3 T-34 tanks in front and plug the gap. Got it, Anton, the 4 people inside the car replied in unison. Oleg, maintain formation, keep up with the T-34 tanks in front, maintain formation. Oleg launched the tank, causing its body to shake and dart out of the haystack. We filled the gap as quickly as possible. Skipan, load armor-piercing shells. Andre, engage in close-range combat, close range to 0. Skipan quickly came down from the observation hole to load the shells, and I began to adjust the level. 6 or 7 German tanks could already be vaguely seen rushing into the defense line ahead, with 76mm anti-tank guns constantly bombarding them on the high ground, but most of them were missed due to being too far away. German large-caliber shells landed one by one next to us, stirring up clumps of mud and muddy water that poured in through the open hatch. Damn it. Skipan, quickly close the hatch. Do you want this tank to be scrapped in this damn vegetable field? Oleg shouted, ha ha ha. Oleg, look at you, you haven't taken a shower in 3 months. Take this opportunity to take a shower. Skipan smiled and closed the hatch. Hound number 2 and number 3, tanks with left and right wings to clamp down on the German devils. Hound number 456 spreads and focuses on attacking the weak areas of the German devils. Pay attention to movement, the captain's voice came from the radio again, and in the thin mist, the 3 tanks at the T-shaped formation dispersed, respectively restraining the front and rear of a group of Germans who had breached the defense line. Oleg. Stop. Right here, Anton turned his head to Oleg from the observation window. The 2 T-34 cars in front of us also scattered and found their respective positions. 100 meters away, the captain's car and the hunting dog number 2 or 3 had already engaged in fire with the German devils. I can clearly see from the sight that the German devils' 3 number 3 tanks are entangled with the hunting dog number 1 and number 2. The hunting dog number 3 is about 50 meters from the rear of the German devils' tank team, but its tracks are broken by 2 number 4 tanks that the German devils are advancing behind. Then, he is concentrated in his firepower, and the turret instantly catches fire. I saw from the sight that 2 people had escaped before their ammunition was ignited. It was really lucky, but there were still people who hadn't escaped. May they rest in peace. Andre, the the German Devil's second-to-last tank, with exposed rear armor. Shoot now. Received. In the sight, I saw that the first 3 tanks of the German Devils were entangled with the Hound 1 and 2, but I didn't notice it. Their weakest armor was already exposed in front of us. I aligned the aiming line with the engine position of the second-to-last tank and fired a 76mm shell that had already been loaded into the barrel. Bang. Dingling, the bullet case bounced out. Ouch. Damn it. Andre, next time you let the cartridge case fall on me, I swear to Anton that I will definitely throw you out of the car. Don't take me with you. Anton turned around and scolded. The shell with residual heat fell to the ground and then bounced onto Oleg. Sorry. I won't do it next time. At least until the end of the war, I joked. The smoke dissipated, and the shells pierced through the tank engines of the German Devils, igniting a big fire. They had been entangled with Hound 1 and 2 just now, but the fire slowly came to a stop. Hound 1 and 2 quickly concentrated their firepower and shot down the burning Tank 3. The 76mm gun on the high ground also found its target, turning the 2 tanks that were advancing backwards over the infantry trench and escaping the infantry attack into scrap metal. Now there are only 2 tanks left. Oleg, drive. Andre, shoot freely, load armor-piercing shells. Aim at weak armor. Anton opens the hatch, extends half of his body, attack. The platoon on the right flank of the defense also rushed over, and several T-34 tanks charged towards the remaining tanks of the German Devils, starting the strangulation. They came at the right time. Why don't we wait for the German Devils to run back to Berlin and come back to support us? Oleg mocked. It would be great if we could come. We only have 5 shells left, said Skipin, stuffing the 4th shell into the barrel. And then. The little boy looked at the old man with anticipation in his eyes. Then we pushed the Germans back. Who is Anton? And who are Oleg and Skipin? The little boy didn't give up and continued to ask. The old man's expression became solemn. They are my friends, my brothers. Can I take a look at them? The little boy naively said. The old man glanced at the little boy, hesitated for a moment, stood up, and slowly walked towards the bed. He pulled out a suitcase from under the bed, took out an iron box, and took out a broken notebook. However, the cover was still intact and clean, written in beautiful and standard Russian handwriting with the words, "To dear Andre." And a bunch of black and white photos with yellow and wrinkled hair. The old man took out a photo with the blurry words, "The Enemy of Fascists 1941" written on the back. There were 4 young people with bright smiles on their faces. Among them, 2 young people stood shoulder to shoulder in front of a brand new tank. One young person stood in the roof hatch, and the other comically sat on the barrel, holding Bayan in his hand. The old man smiled and pointed to one of the 2 shoulder huggers, saying, "Look, that's me." The little boy smiled and took the photo to look at. How many of them are there? The old man's smile slowly began to solidify, and eventually even tears flowed from the corners of his eyes. I will never forget them, they are real heroes. The old man wiped away the tears from the corners of his eyes. The little boy quickly put down the photo upon seeing this. Are you okay, Grandpa? It's okay, it's just a sudden memory of something. Can you explain it? The old man remained silent, and the sunlight shone on the young faces in the photo, their smiles so beautiful. Every time I see these photos, it feels like time is going back, and I can always see their appearance. The old man broke his silence and stared at the photo. That was in 1940, when I was still working with my father in a factory in Minsk. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Steel Casting 1941. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2 Steel Casting 1941 1 Department, Fitter Andre, 1 Department, Fitter Andre, please report to Factory 1 immediately, Director's Office. Report to Factory 1, Director's Office. In the noisy processing workshop of Minsk Machinery Factory, the voice of the political director came from the loudspeaker. I put down my work, stuffed my gloves into my waist, and strode to the office to report, "Andre, it seems that Lev is going to talk to you again. Did you kick his door open yesterday while drinking?" laughed Ilya, a nearby colleague. Me. Don't joke, even if you pay me 10 rubles, I don't want to touch his broken door, ha ha ha. The workers on the side laughed. I arrived at the office door and was about to knock when I suddenly heard two strangers talking to Director Lev inside. I put my ear to the door and listened carefully. "It's like this, we need workers here who are proficient in mechanical knowledge, and now we need such manpower." Afterwards, covered by a sharp metallic sound, I simply knocked on the door. "Report, who is it?" "A department fitter, Andre." "Okay, please come in." So, I pushed open the door and walked in. In the small office, there were two soldiers wearing light yellow military uniforms, one of whom was wearing glasses and holding a folder in his hand. "Comrade Igor, he is Andre, the strongest and most mechanical comrade here," the director flattered the soldier wearing glasses and said. The soldier wearing glasses walked over and saluted me, saying, "Hello Comrade Andre, I am Colonel Igor. The person next to me is my deputy, Lieutenant Yakov of the Ministry of Internal Affairs." "Andre, recently the Army Department needs a group of personnel who understand mechanical principles and can control. You are one of the top fitters in our factory, and I think you must be the kind of person they want." Before I could ask a question, Director Lev solved my question. "Yes, Comrade Andre, we need someone like you who understands mechanics. We hope you can join the army and serve our country." Before I could figure out what was going on, the colonel handed me a document form. "Order number 25 of the Soviet Supreme Command." There are several eye-catching letters written in red on the front of the meter. I roughly read them, which means that I have reached the age of joining the army, and the skills I possess are very suitable for me to serve in the army tank unit. I must fulfill my obligations and responsibilities to serve my country. There is also a signature box below. Are you ready to contribute to your motherland, Comrade Andre? Colonel Igor handed me a pen, and the lieutenant next to him stared into my eyes as if he could see through my thoughts, while Director Lev leaned back in his chair and lit a cigarette. Before I could react, I instinctively took the pen from Colonel Igor's hand and wrote my name on the signature box. Lieutenant Yakov took the form from my hand and handed it to Colonel Igor. The colonel glanced and nodded. "Very well, Comrade Andre. Thank you very much for serving our country. So, next step, let's meet in our military camp." Speaking, Colonel Igor patted my shoulder and then turned to face Director Lev. "All right, Comrade Andre, you can go back now." The director signaled that I could leave now, and I walked out of the office, down the stairs, ready to return to the workshop. At this moment, the broadcasting horn rang again. "Department 2, Mechanic Oleg, Department 2, Mechanic Oleg, please report to Factory Department 1 and Director's Office immediately." "Report to Factory Department 1 and Director's Office." "Oleg. Does he also want to join the army?" So coincidentally, Oleg is my neighbor and also my good friend. We grew up together and worked together. I sighed in my heart. It seemed like I would be with guns and cannons in the future. I looked at my watch and it was already 12 noon. It was time for dinner, so I decided to just leave the factory gate and walk home. The streets of Minsk are very wide, and military trucks or newly produced tanks occasionally come along. On the sidewalks on both sides, teams of soldiers or officers dressed in neat and clean military uniforms occasionally passed by. They walked into the cafeteria or shops on both sides of the road, talking and laughing. I glanced at them and thought, maybe tomorrow, I will also wear military uniforms, just like you. Being a soldier is actually quite good, respected everywhere. I glanced at the conscription poster posted on the wall. I was very happy in my heart and quickened my pace, hoping to let my parents know soon. Of course, there was also Natalia. Arriving at the residential area on the outskirts of the city, I strode upstairs and pushed open my door. "You're back, and the food is ready. Come and eat now," my mother greeted me to the dining table. I couldn't wait to tell my parents what happened today. Today, 2 officers came to our workshop and they said they were here to recruit soldiers. They thought I was suitable for driving tanks, so they recruited me in. Really? That's really great. Joining the army now is such an honorable thing, isn't it much better than working in a workshop? Yeah, I think so too. It seems like Oleg has also been recruited. This is really great, maybe we can be together, my father also said. Andrei, you are 21 years old now and should be serving your country. This is something that every aspiring Soviet youth should do. You must do it well. I picked up a piece of bread and happily ate it. I recently saw in the newspaper that Germany is fighting everywhere in Europe, and now France has been defeated by them. Will their next target be the Soviet Union? The mother looked at her father as she spoke. This is impossible. Don't read those spreading rumors in the newspapers anymore. The Soviet Union and Germany are allies, and besides, the Soviet Union is so big. Where does Germany have the ability to attack the Soviet Union? Father said calmly. Even if the Germans do come over, we can still kick them back, I laughed. After finishing lunch, I hurriedly left the door to find Natalia, who lives in another residential building. I walked to her house and knocked on her door. Natasha, are you at home? Not long after, a voice came over. Who is it? It's me, Andrei. I'm looking for Natalia. In no time, a woman opened the door. She was not Natalia, but her mother, Mom. Wait a moment, I'll go open the door. Natalia spoke inside and quickly ran out. Hello, can I go for a walk with Natalia? I smiled and said to her mother. His mother smiled and nodded. Go ahead and come back early. Speaking, I went downstairs with Natalia. I walked shoulder to shoulder with her in the garden of the residential area. Natasha, I'm going to join the army. I just received a notification today. That's great. You look so spirited in military uniform. I think you will look very handsome in military uniform. After speaking, Natalia's face turned red. Hee, that's for sure. Guess what kind of soldier I want to be? Natalia shook her head in confusion. I'm going to become a tank soldier, and the officer in charge of conscription said I understand mechanics and am very suitable for driving tanks. I made a gesture to drive a tank, he said. Natalia laughed. Haha, that's really great. It will definitely be very interesting. When will you go to the military camp to report? I don't know, but it should only be in these few days. While we were chatting, we met Oleg, who was also taking a walk, and he also saw us. Natasha, Andrei, good afternoon. Oleg, were you also recruited into the army? I asked. Yes, how did you know? I was really confused at the time. Suddenly, I was recruited into the army, but that's also good. Being able to operate tanks is also good. Today, I was called to Lev's office before you, and just like that, I was spotted by the 2 officers inside, just like you. Is that right? Maybe we can still be together, right? Huh, said Oleg enthusiastically, leaning on my shoulder. Did they tell you when to report to the campsite? Not really, but what they mean is that it's almost there. It should be tomorrow. I looked at my watch and it's getting late. Oleg has also arrived home, and I'm ready to take Natalia home. In the afternoon, I arrived at the workshop and the factory director said I didn't need to come back to work anymore. Tomorrow, I had to go to the military to report, but it didn't matter. Anyway, I was tired of living in this ghost place, so I left the machinery factory whistling. The next day, I tore off an old page from the calendar and ushered in a new day. On March 10, 1941, I sat in the living room waiting for news from the military personnel. After about half an hour, the sound of the engine of a military transport vehicle came downstairs, followed by the sound of boots stepping on the cement floor and arriving at my doorstep. Hello, I am from the Army Department. Please open the door. My mother quickly went to open the door, and a lieutenant in the army stood at the door, bowing. Hello, madam. I am looking for Comrade Andrei Vasilyev. He has been recruited by the Army Department. Please come with me to report now. I quickly walked over and said, I'm ready. I said to the second lieutenant. I turned around and hugged my mother and father. Andre, you will have to take care of yourself from now on and write letters to your family frequently. After bidding farewell to my family, I followed the second lieutenant downstairs. In front of the building was a military troop transport truck, and a hand extended from behind the truck compartment. I guessed correctly that it was indeed Oleg. Hey kid, welcome to the army. So, I went from an ordinary fitter to a Red Army soldier, and a truck took us out of Minsk. We arrived at a military camp on the outskirts of the city and began our training to familiarize ourselves with tanks. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Stay vigilant. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Stay vigilant. Accompanied by the rugged roads in the countryside, we arrived at the training camp for Army tank soldiers. At first, we thought there would be neat barracks, with brand new tanks placed in front of us. However, the reality was not like this. Through the thick sand and dust rolled up by the trucks, I saw that the entire camp was a wasteland flattened by bulldozers. Rows of green felt tents were set up on the wasteland, and the tanks were some old-looking tanks. Under one of the tanks, there was also a person with a face full of oil stains, comically dressed in the uniform of a single tank soldier. He poked his head out and said to a person next to him, "Hey. Lexier, pass me the wrench quickly, this broken pipe is leaking oil again." Dust swept into the carriage, coughing and coughing. Cough and cough. A cough came from inside the carriage. In no time, the voice of the second lieutenant came from the front of the car. "We're almost there, comrades. You need to be more alert. The colonel doesn't like people who are listless." In no time, the truck stopped and the dust gradually dissipated. A soldier opened the carriage barrier. "Yo! What a bunch of new recruits. Quickly move your butt off the carriage. We didn't want to stay in this stuffy carriage for a long time and jumped out one by one. Attention! Stand at attention. Line up and quickly fasten all your clothes. Why is your hair so long? Do you want it to be used to knit a sweater? Smooth it out quickly." The second lieutenant pointed aside. The truck drove away, and behind it, a burst of sand and dust rose up. We became like the people who had just emerged from the mud pile, and the smoke and dust dissipated. We are standing in front of a barracks, and there is a sign on the door of the barracks that reads, "Commander's Headquarters." The second lieutenant was about to walk in and knock on the door, but there was a very loud argument coming from inside. As soon as he reached out his knocking hand, he withdrew it. How many times have I told my mother? The tanks here are simply scrap iron, and farmers are unwilling to use them when they give them to farmers to cultivate land. What can these crap do? Colonel, please remain calm. The Western Army Command has no intention of updating equipment or adding new recruits. It's already good that they can transport these equipment, so don't nitpick anymore. Picky. My God. What kind of people am I talking to? Have you seen the battle in Western Europe? German tanks are almost flattening Europe. You are still telling me that these equipment are good. The latest German tanks can crush these pieces of junk. Then there was a sound of documents falling. Colonel. Please don't say these words that violate national relations again. Moscow strictly prohibits the spread of such rumors. If you are reported, I think, life will be even harder. A captain opened the door of the captain's command headquarters, and saw us pause for a moment. He then put on his hat and walked down. When he approached us, he stopped for a moment, sneered, got into a small car, and drove out of the camp. At this moment, the colonel also walked out, wearing a pair of horse pants and a clean white shirt. The hem was tightly tucked into the waist of his pants. He went out and smoothed his somewhat messy hair, licked his mouth, and walked down the stairs. He walked up to our column of new recruits and looked at us. After about 3 minutes of silence, he he suddenly spoke up. So, are you the bravest, smartest, most capable, and most knowledgeable people chosen by Igor? Whenever he pops out the letter most from his mouth, he moves in front of someone and deliberately amplifies his voice. It made our originally gray faces even more messy. After circling around us, he took out a cigarette, and the second lieutenant next to him quickly pulled out a match to light it. Ivan, you go take them to take a shower, then take your clothes and set up a tent at the third place in the afternoon. Then I have to speak. He took a puff of smoke and said to the second lieutenant who brought us here. Yes. Comrade Captain, I will go and handle it immediately. The second lieutenant quickly stood at attention and returned. And give us a command to say, attention. Stand at attention. Turn left. He came to the left side of our new recruits. Move on. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. So, our group of new recruits walked with crooked and irregular steps towards the camp. We arrived at the bathhouse, which was just a small area surrounded by thin wooden boards. Inside, there was a drainage pit for drainage, and several wooden boards were placed on top for people to step on. Where's the water? Without water, how can we take a shower? The 10 young men with bare buttocks looked at each other. At this moment, the voice of the second lieutenant came from above. Comrades, stand still and welcome to the Pramer training camp. As he spoke, a soldier with a water pipe appeared beside him. Boil water, the second lieutenant patted the soldier's shoulder, and a strong stream of water sprayed onto us. They stood on a platform outside the bathhouse, using pipes to flush water into the bathhouse, and we were all in a state of embarrassment when the sudden water rushed through us. Fortunately, the water is warm, otherwise we must freeze to death. Hurry up and wash it well. Oleg rubbed his bare body as he spoke. After about 10 minutes, the water stopped and we got dressed and came out of the bathhouse. The second lieutenant led us to a truck and threw out pieces of military uniforms from the back of the truck. More precisely, they were all black jumpsuits, just like the uniform of the person who needed a wrench I saw when I first arrived at the camp. We all put on our uniforms, and the soldiers on the side picked up the jackets we were wearing when we arrived and threw them into the garbage dump on the side. Huh, Andre, do you know what you look like in this outfit? Like what? I asked Oleg in confusion, like his mother big baby. Ha ha ha, he said and made a funny gesture of sucking his thumb. I was so angry that I reached out and locked his head. Stop making trouble, the second lieutenant is here, he begged for mercy. Attention all new recruits. Run immediately to Field 3 and follow this private. The second lieutenant assigned a soldier to take us to Field 3. The third plot is a flat open area that has been pushed flat, with a large piece of green felt cloth and brackets placed on it. This is where you guys are staying. 30 minutes, quickly set up the tent for me. I'll come over and take a look later. The second lieutenant ordered us to rush forward and start setting up the tent. I picked up a bracket and whispered to Oleg. I thought the place we came from was so formal. It turned out to be such a place, hey. Hey, let's just make do with it. Anyway, now we're all part of the Soviet Red Army, a serious unit. Although the area is a bit broken, it's just temporary. It's quite the same thing to hear you say that. Did you hear the captain shouting in the room just now? Hee, this person is really crazy, he's the opposite of Colonel Igor I saw before. Hee. If you don't tell me, I forgot. I've already taken his nickname, so he's called Mad Cow. How about it, it looks like him. I almost burst out laughing. You're such a talented person, you really should go to Moscow University to study language. Hee. After a while, the second lieutenant walked over. The tent has been set up. Very well, comrades. You have done a great job. It seems that you are ready to join the Red Army. Now, go to classroom 1. Colonel Victor, the commander of the Pramer training camp, is preparing to give you a lecture, tidy up your military appearance, and march in line. We took care of our clothes and followed the second lieutenant towards classroom 1. I finally saw a decent house, and I thought to myself, classroom 1 is a wooden house, just like the one in the commander's command headquarters, and they are in a neat row. It's a bit like the layout of a church inside. After entering, there are rows of wooden chairs on both sides, with a hallway left in the middle. At the end of the hallway, there is a low platform with a simple lectern on it. Behind the lectern, there is a large blackboard with a side view of a tank drawn with chalk, and the principles inside are illustrated one by one. We sat in a row according to the instructions of the second lieutenant. After the second lieutenant adjusted our position, we walked out the door. In no time, Major Mad Cow walked in. He stood on the podium, but this time, he was neatly dressed, with loose horse pants tucked into shiny riding boots and a neatly ironed shirt. He was tightly tied with a leather belt around his waist, with experience badges pinned to his chest, and the stars on his shoulder pads made people respect this officer. He paused for a moment, raised his head, and said in the loudest voice I have ever heard. "Comrades. My name is Victor Abram Smirnov. Welcome to the Pramer training camp. My training camp. I know that everyone here is the best among Soviet youth," he said as he walked down the podium and looked at us. "Soviet Union. Our great motherland. From the English Channel to Siberia, our great motherland is an invincible country in the world. As early as 1812, Napoleon coveted our territory. But as a result, he froze to death on our great homeland. And now, some rodents in Europe are having the same malicious intentions as Napoleon did back then. Although they wear a mask of hypocrisy, they still cannot hide from our great leaders. Our great Soviet Red Army will never let these rodents cross the Soviet border half a step." As he spoke, he paced back and forth in the hallway. He glanced at me and reached out his calloused hand to pinch my shoulder. "I know. Everyone who comes to join the army feels that being a soldier is more honorable than working in a factory, but I have something to tell you first. Everyone in the Soviet Red Army was made of steel and courage. In the face of any danger, they will not retreat. Comrades. Are you ready?" Upon hearing this, our blood boiled and we shouted in unison. Colonel Victor reached out to signal us to be quiet. Now, the German army has almost occupied the entire Europe, and only the Soviet Union still stands on the land of Europe. The ambitions of the Germans are definitely not limited to France and Poland. Comrades. We must remain vigilant and not let the Germans invade the territory of our great motherland. After speaking, there was a fierce round of applause below us. All right, comrades, I hope you can become the elites of our country as soon as possible. Tomorrow, we will start formal training. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. The Meaning of the State, Part 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4 The Meaning of the State, Part 1, Didi. Didi. With the sound of a flute, we arrived on March 11, 1941, and began our formal training today. We quickly put on the baby uniform we received yesterday, which was given a new nickname by Oleg. Afterwards, we were pulled to the tank farm and lined up. A tank has already been parked there, although it has been repaired. Some defects can still be seen. A sergeant walked up to the front of the team. Comrades, my name is Anatoly and I am your instructor. You can call me Sergeant Anatoly. That is the tank you are about to encounter, the T-26 light tank. You are all people who understand the principles of mechanics. I believe I don't need to say more. Next, I will explain the basic operation of tanks to you. As he spoke, he lifted out a blackboard, on which he had already drawn an internal schematic diagram of a tank. He pointed to the blackboard and said, "This is the turret of the tank, and below is the body. The main attack weapons of the T-26 light tank are a 45mm tank gun and a 7.62mm DT machine gun. Its crew consists of 3 people, and the battle chamber is located in the middle of the body and inside the turret. The driver's position is here, while the commander and gunner are in the rear turret. It should be noted that the tank's transmission is in the front and the engine is at the rear, which are very susceptible to damage. During combat, attention should be paid to protecting these two parts. He drew 2 red circles and marked their positions. If they break down or get stuck, your tank will immediately stop, and your situation will be in trouble. At this point, you need your personal weapons to protect you. As he spoke, he took out a pistol from his waist. The Tokarev pistol is the last weapon of tank soldiers. If your tank is unfortunately destroyed or damaged to the point where it cannot move, then you can only rely on it. He fiddled with the pistol twice, not getting into his waist. Then he spoke to us. Who among you can drive a tractor? Speaking, Oleg stood up with a silly smile. I drove a tractor at Kalev's farm for a few days. Great, driving a tank is quite easy. As long as you have driven a tractor, you can drive a tank. So who among you knows how to tighten screws? No one stood up now, so Master Anatoly turned his gaze to me. Hello, strong man, it's you. You look so strong, it's a pity not to become a gunner. He pushed me forward as he spoke. The main gun operation is quite simple. As long as you are not a fool, you will definitely tamper with that gun. I felt a wave of discomfort after listening. So, which of you has more agile eyes? You have a quick reaction when looking at things. 3 people in the team stood up. Just you, come on. The sergeant ordered someone to come out. Very well, it seems that you are all geniuses, born to drive tanks. As he spoke, he pushed the 3 of us towards the T-26 tank behind us. Go up, young men, don't be afraid. This is your home, regardless of life or death. You go to the driver's seat, he said to Oleg. You go to the turret. He gestured for me and another person to prepare in the turret. We immediately boarded the tank and entered the battle room. And the sergeant chattered outside, talking to the rest of the people. Hey, my name is Andrei and I live in the city center of Minsk. Nice to meet you. I extended my hand to the person who entered the battle room with me, and it saluted. Skipin, a suburb of Minsk, lives on a collective farm. Hey. Andrei, don't even tell me you know new friends. Oleg also leaned in. My name is Oleg, and I live in Minsk like this kid. After they got to know each other, Dashi had already stood on the roof of the car, bending over and looking down at us from the hatch. Hey. Young men, it's not time to make friends now, please focus on listening to me. So we immediately maintained a good standing posture. Great. Driver. Now twist the switch on the right side in front of you. Oleg was stunned for a moment before he understood what he was talking about. The sergeant immediately poked his head into the car and shouted loudly. What the fuck are you doing? Oleg was startled and quickly checked in on the switch. Great. That's the battery switch. When you turn it on, your tank is electrified and you can start the engine anytime. Next, turn on the red switch on the left side in front of you, which has a sign saying, Start. Oleg didn't dare to delay. As soon as he finished talking about starting, the tank trembled and then came out, which I think was the best sound I've ever heard in my life. Very good. So far, you have completed half of the courses as a driver. You are his mother genius. Now, driver, listen up. There are 2 brake levers in front of you, which are responsible for the forward and stop of the left and right tracks. And next to your right thigh is a gearbox transmission, which is responsible for your tank gear. The T-26 light tank has 3 gears, the first 2 are forward and the last one is reverse. When you walk on flat ground, you need to switch to first gear, which is marked on the gear lever. When you walk on rough roads or climb hills, you need to switch to second gear, which is also marked on the gear lever. And when you need to reverse, you just need to pull the gear lever all the way back, so you can escape. However, I have always believed that there is no need to set this gear because the great Soviet Red Army soldiers will never regress. He poked his head into the hatch and said, Alright, dear pilot comrade, quickly make your tank move and move forward to the first flag. He pointed to a flag planted on the farmland in front of the tank and said. This won't stump me, isn't it exactly like a tractor? Oleg said excitedly. The sergeant also jumped off the tank. I took a big horn from the table. Oleg grabbed the brake lever with both hands and pushed forward together. The tank paused for a moment, and then the engine seemed to rev up even faster. With the creaking sound of the gearbox, the tank slowly moved forward. Ha ha ha. Do you see that? How powerful. I am now a tank pilot. Oleg excitedly began to push the brake lever randomly, causing the tank's route to become crooked, a flag that deviates from a straight distance. Hey! You bastard! What the hell are you doing? Don't twist the brake lever. Keep the two brake levers flush, and the track can move forward. I looked through the observation window of the turret and saw the sergeant dancing and cursing there. I quickly kicked Oleg to signal him to maintain a straight line and steadily drive towards the flag. Oleg reacted and immediately regained consciousness from his excited self-indulgence. He flattened the brake lever and the tank started walking in a straight line again. Great! That's it. Look, now the tank is walking in a straight line again, so it's important to ensure that the two brake rods are in the same position to ensure that the speed of the tracks on both sides is the same. Now they're not at a straight distance from the flag, so you need to change direction. Changing direction is also very simple, you just need to push the brake rod on the side you want to change direction forward, while the other brake rod stays in place, and you can turn to the place you want to turn. Strong man. Strong man. Tell the person next to you to poke his big head out. After a while, I realized that the sergeant was calling me. I quickly patted Skipan's shoulder and told him to poke his head out. Skipan and I exchanged positions, and he stood directly opposite the cabin door, stepping on a ladder and sticking his head out. This is perfect. In combat, you cannot always maintain a clear and comprehensive view. Because you are all crowded in that iron box, relying on a few small windows, it is absolutely impossible to see the situation around you without blind spots. So, you need to ensure that there is someone on the turret as a navigator when the view is not good. If it is in a fierce battle, I actually do not recommend doing this because your head can easily be opened up. Okay, strong man. Driver. Idiot. You three, drive the tank to the flag, circle around, and then roll back. The sergeant raised his horn and shouted vigorously. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. The Meaning of the Country, Central. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. The Meaning of the Country, Central. What else is this guy talking about? A strong man. A fool, Stephen said with some confusion and anger. Yeah, idiot. Oleg laughed. Stephen lowered his head and patted my shoulder. Yeah. A strong man, the three of us burst out laughing together. We returned from the flag in about 10 minutes. And he drove the tank back to its original position. Oleg poked his head out of the cockpit and smiled, saying, Master. How did you drive? Do you have any Red Army style? The sergeant said with a disdainful expression, Your level is still too poor. You won't survive for 5 minutes on the battlefield. I saw through the observation window that the sergeant had 2 soldiers carry a box of shells. You can't survive on the battlefield alone by driving. The main attacking weapon of a tank is that powerful tank gun. Now, strong man. Come down and join the fool to put this box of shells into the ammunition rack behind you. I looked around and sure enough, there was a circle of empty, honeycomb-like space where shells were placed. Stephen jumped off the car, and I was also preparing to jump out. One person loads shells in the car, another person passes them outside. Strong man, you stay inside. The sergeant pointed to me, whose leg had just stepped out of the turret hatch, and said. Stepan took out a shell from the ammunition box with blue and white circles painted on its head and handed it to me. But the sergeant took it over first, holding up the shells in both hands and saying, "Watch it. This is a hated armor-piercing bullet, which has a very flexible and blunt shell added to the hard and pointed warhead. When it hits the target, it will deform, reducing the chance of being bounced back by the enemy's armor on the inclined surface. This thing is best used at a long distance to maximize its effectiveness." The sergeant threw the shell in his hand at Skipan, who was startled and quickly caught it. On the battlefield, you need to be highly focused, fighting won't be so easy. Skipan handed me the shell, and I stuffed it into a honeycomb hole, just right. Skipan took out another shell with a red paint on its head. This time, he didn't hand it directly to me, but walked up to the sergeant and stopped for a moment, giving him a glance. The sergeant said comically, "Hey. Dear loading officer comrade, you've learned to be smart." Then he took the shell, but this time he had to be much more careful, holding it in his hand like a baby and saying, "Comrades, this is the magic weapon of the Red Army. Grenades. They have tremendous power and are usually used to deal with soft targets such as infantry, fortifications, and thin armor. The warhead of this shell contains dangerous explosives, and this warhead," as he spoke, he touched the top of the bullet, "this is the fuse. If you accidentally drop a bullet onto the ground or hit a hard object, then you will go up to the sky with this little thing. However, what our Red Army does not lack the most is this kind of thing. In battle, you can use this kind of shell to your heart's content. No matter what you deal with, just hit him." Speaking, the sergeant carefully handed me the shell. And reminded me to handle it gently. Outside, he started talking again. "When you replenish ammunition, be sure to distinguish between armor-piercing shells and grenades. This way, in chaotic battles, you can easily find the shells you need. When you finish firing a shell, there are two options you can choose from. One is to throw the empty shell out of the tank, but this way, you need to open the hatch and easily expose personal targets. And most importantly, you will waste precious resources of your country, which is a very bad behavior. Of course, there is a second option. It's about putting the completed shells back into the ammunition rack, but it's best for you to distinguish between empty shells and unfired shells. I believe that you wouldn't want to touch a shell and put it in the barrel while fighting the enemy, only to find that it can't be fired. In that case, you will be ruined. This is a greater waste of our country's resources and a worse behavior. Therefore, please manage your ammunition well. At this time, support for our country is also a guarantee of our own safety." Upon hearing this, I quickly placed 2 shells in the empty honeycomb on my left and right sides. There were nearly 200 honeycomb in the combat room, and only 2 shells were placed inside. Although the comparison was obvious, I was still a bit nervous. Next, there is another weapon that I haven't introduced yet. Speaking, he took out an iron disc from the table and said, "The 7.62mm DT machine gun is an infantry harvester. When you are engaged in close combat with enemies, you need to free up personal space to operate the machine gun next to the driver's seat or in the turret, shattering everything alive in front of you into fragments. Of course, when you are engaged in close combat with enemy tanks, this thing can also be of great help to you." He said, taking out another disc, "Hold them in both hands and say on my left side, there is a regular armor bullet that works the same as a shell, while on the right side, there is a tracer bullet used to indicate targets and interfere with enemy line of sight. It contains a bullet chain, with an average of 3 regular armor bullets separated by a tracer bullet. When you shoot, you need to hold the trigger for 3 seconds before releasing it. This way, you will clearly see a green light band and can also shoot continuously. Of course, the precious resources of our country are not limited to it will make you squander recklessly, and each tank carries very few tracer bullets. Only when you need it, are you allowed to use it. When you are engaged in close combat with enemy tanks, you should use tracer bullets to focus on hitting the driver's observation window and turret sight of the enemy tank, or the position of the tank's radiator and engine, because tracer bullets can greatly interfere with the enemy's line of sight, and the observation window is relatively fragile among all the components of the tank. Tracer bullets contain white phosphorus, which is a highly flammable chemical that can ignite anything flammable, such as gasoline or diesel. I'm not saying it can definitely destroy tanks, that's just farting. It's just a certain probability that this can happen. You understand? He jumped onto the tank and gestured with his hands at the places he was talking about. So what is the probability? Asked a new recruit below. Well, it's almost the same as your chance of becoming his mother field marshal. There was a burst of laughter below. As he spoke, he handed 2 magazines to Skippon, who then handed them to me. There were several bookshelves on the inner wall of the turret, which were perfect places to hold these types of magazines, so I placed them inside. Alright, dear comrades. Now we're going to perform the cannon fire. Those who haven't heard the sound of the gunfire should cover their ears. However, I don't recommend doing this because one day, you will hear it on the battlefield. I don't want you to be scared and wet your pants. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. The Meaning of the State, Part 2. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. The Meaning of the State, Part 2. As he spoke, the sergeant climbed up the tank turret and said, "Now, I'll demonstrate how to fire," and then got inside the tank. "Strong man, please step aside first and let me demonstrate the process of aiming, loading ammunition, and firing the gun to you." I quickly stepped aside and gave the gunner's position to him. He pointed to a single port sight next to the bolt and said, "This is the sight of the main gun, which has some dividing lines inside to measure the target distance and auxiliary lines to mark the elevation of the muzzle height." I leaned my head over. "You can take a closer look." He pointed to the 2 cranks under the scope and said, "These 2 cranks are the pitch machine of the main gun, which contains many precise gears. You need to oil them frequently and prevent debris from entering." Then he touched a handle on the inner wall seat of the turret next to the main gun and said, "This is the neck of the tank, also known as the steering wheel, which controls the steering of the tank turret. Its speed and performance depend on your arm strength, as well as the quality and maintenance of this batch of tanks. And our protagonist is this gun. This is the barrel, and the crank above it is the bolt opening handle. The firing bolt is located on the side of the bolt facing the gunner, which is the handle on the left side of the bolt. When you discover the target from the sight, you need to notify the loader to load the corresponding ammunition, and then calculate the distance of the target based on the density, advance, and adjust the aiming division line. Then rotate the artillery pitch machine and align the point where the adjusted horizontal and vertical dividing lines meet with the target. After determining the target, pull down the fire bolt, and the shell can be fired and hit the target accurately. Afterwards, all you need to do is pull down the bolt handle, the bolt will open, and the empty shell will pop out on its own. Do you understand?" After speaking, he handed me a telescope and took out a grenade from the nearby honeycomb ammunition rack. "Next, let me demonstrate the process of firing a gun to you. Hold a telescope and go to the hatch to look at the abandoned farmhouse in the field ahead." I extended my head outside the cabin and raised my telescope to search for the abandoned farmhouse. Sure enough, there was an abandoned and dilapidated farmhouse about 100 meters away. "Tell me approximately how many meters the target is." The roar of the sergeant came from inside the cabin. Comrade Dashi, I think it's about 100 meters." The sergeant deftly opened the bolt of the gun, inserted the grenade in his hand into the barrel, closed the bolt, and then looked at the sight, completing it in one go. Then came a creaking and twisting sound, and the sergeant's eyes were tightly pressed against the sight, while his hands began to shake the pitch machine. After a while, the creaking and twisting sound stopped. "Get ready to fire." Then, he pulled the fire hydrant. He said, "Bang." A loud bang accompanied by a burst of impact rolled up the dust on the ground. This was the first time I had heard the sound of tank guns up close. At first, there was a buzzing sound in my ears, but later on, it became much better. Some even fell in love with this feeling. I raised my telescope and saw that the abandoned farmhouse had been completely destroyed by grenades. turning into a pile of ruins on the ground. Target destruction, I lowered my head happily and said to the sergeant. The sergeant pulled down the bolt handle and, accompanied by a burst of incompletely burning gunpowder and smoke, the shell popped out of the barrel. Zao Leng. Ding ding ling. The smell of gunpowder filled the battle room, and I felt a bitter sensation in my mouth. Come on. Zhuang Han, it's your turn to try the operation of this cannon. The sergeant patted my leg, gesturing for me to come down and operate the cannon. In fact, I had long wanted to give it a try in my heart, and I couldn't wait to return to the gunner's position. The sergeant was guiding me on the side. First, take out a shell from the ammunition rack. I took out the last shell placed in the ammunition rack. The armor-piercing shell. After pulling down the bolt handle, push the shell into the barrel. Be sure to push the shell completely to the end of the barrel and ensure that the firing pin chamber does not get stuck when resetting. The bolt handle was easily pulled open, and the bolt opened. From the inside, you could see the outside through the barrel. The sunlight shone on the inner wall of the barrel, revealing fine rifling lines that spiraled out into the barrel. I stuffed a shell the size of an adult's forearm into the barrel, and the shell hit the barrel with a dull metallic sound. Great, then reset the bolt handle to raise the needle chamber. I pushed the bolt handle back to its original position with a clang clang. The shells are loaded. Okay, look at the sight. Around 12 o'clock, there is a pile of straw at a distance of 180, regardless of the advance, aim and fire. In the scope representative confidential unit, the number on the right represents the target distance. Adjust the height of the muzzle and align the middle point of the marking line with the target after binding and sealing. According to what the sergeant said, I saw 2 buttons below the scope, engraved with the 2 letters he said. I turned and twisted according to the lines inside the scope until the number on the right is set on a scale between 150 and 200. The aiming line moved down a bit, and the intersection of the horizontal and vertical lines aligned with the straw pile. I put my right hand on the handle of the fire hydrant. Aim completed, fire. After I finished shouting, I suddenly pulled the handle of the fire hydrant. Bang! In the sight glass, a shell pulled an arc and flew towards the straw pile 180 meters away. The shell did not hit the straw pile and hit about 5 meters away, stirring up a patch of soil. The sergeant looked at him with a telescope and said, "Not bad, not bad. It's already good to be able to shoot like this for the first time. You have a natural talent as a gunner, but you're still not proficient enough. All right. Now withdraw the casings, driver. Use the DT machine gun on your left. Strong man, give the magazine I just gave you to the driver." I withdrew the casings and handed the 2 plates to Oleg. The magazine of the DT machine gun is pressed into the gap above the receiver. Then, pull the bolt on the right side of the receiver, load the bullet, and you can shoot. Through the observation window, you can see the trajectory of the machine gun. The sergeant lowered his head and said, "Understood. Comrade Dashi." Oleg quickly loaded the magazine this time, click. He quickly loaded it. 100 meters ahead, in the ruins of a farmhouse, spot fire, aim and shoot every time you pull the trigger with a 3-second interval. Got it. Comrade Dashi. After a while, the sound of gunshots coming from the driver's seat was da-da-da-da-da-da. Da-da-da-da-da-da. The tinkling sound of the shells falling on the iron plate was clear and pleasant to the ear. Great. You need to control the shooting time interval and try to keep the bullets on the same line as much as possible to ensure that all your bullets hit the enemy instead of hitting the soil. Alright, your group has a general understanding of the operation of the T-26 light tank. Next, 3 people will work in groups and take turns to operate. Before 2 p.m., everyone should have a smell of diesel and gunpowder on their bodies. Driver, strong man, fool. You can go down now and switch to the next group. So, today our ears were buzzing with the sound of gunfire. The next day, we went to the classroom in the wooden house to learn about the structure and repair of tank engines. On the third day, we had physical training. Each person carried an ammunition box and ran more than 10 laps around the primer training camp. This was not a difficult task for me, but Oleg was so tired that he couldn't catch his breath. Until the end of April, we were repeating everything we had done in these 3 days. In the end, as soon as we smell the smell of gunpowder and diesel, we feel nauseous. Everyone can carry a 40-kilogram ammunition box and run around the training camp for a day like a gorilla. On April 30th, we were allowed to return to our respective homes to visit our families for 2 days. Oleg and I had already been groomed the night before, dressed in brand new dark yellow army uniforms, and wore the newly issued private rank on our shoulders. Shining our long boots, the next day we took a truck to transport supplies to Minsk and returned to our respective homes in the city center. I was thrilled when I arrived at my doorstep, imagining my parents seeing me in a spirited military uniform. Opened the door of the house. "Father! Mother! I'm back!" I shouted happily. My mother quickly walked out of the kitchen. "Son is back. Vasily. Son is back." I, who had never been away for a long time, suddenly left home for over 2 months and returned, which made my mother very happy and quickly called my father out. Father walked out of the living room with a newspaper in hand. "Andrei. Child, you're back. How are you doing over there?" My father held my shoulders with both hands and spoke, while my mother patted the dust on my military uniform with her hands. "I'm doing pretty well. Now I'm a tank gunner in the Soviet Red Army." Father happily said, "Andrei, you really should wear this military uniform. I am truly proud of you." Mother returned to the kitchen and brought the prepared dinner to the table. "Stop standing now, my son is already hungry. Dinner is ready, sit down and eat." My father and I walked over to the dining table and sat down. "Andrei, is it difficult in the Red Army?" Mother asked. "It's not difficult. We have 3 meals a day and a monthly allowance of 5 rubles. That's it." Speaking, he took out the newly issued allowance from his arms and handed it to his mother. "Andrei, I've been hearing news lately that Germans have deployed a large number of troops on the Polish border. I'm not sure if this is true. Do you have any news in the military?" Father asked. I remembered what Colonel Victor, the mad cow, said when we first arrived at the training camp. Germans have almost flattened Europe. My heart was even more uncertain, but I had to say something to calm my family's emotions. "There's nothing else. Even if all the German troops really go to the border, our brave Red Army troops can still resist the enemy thousands of miles away. You can rest assured. We will never let what happened to France happen to Soviet territory." I clenched my fists and said. This made my mother feel uneasy. "Andrei, the army is for war. You are already a Red Army soldier now, and you may face many unexpected situations. You must be careful. If there is really a war, remember not to do anything foolish, not show off as a hero, always think about it, and not be a brainless rascal." I became impatient and picked up a piece of Liba, saying perfunctorily. Okay, I won't be a hero. Let's not say that anymore. War won't happen in 10 years. My mother was also helpless. "Natalia came to see you this afternoon and left a letter for you on the table. You can go and take a look later." My mother pointed to a letter on the table and said. I quickly put down my Liba in my hand, chewed on something, and went to get the letter, then quickly opened it. "Dear Andrei, I don't know how you are doing in the army, but I think it should be very good. Yesterday at school, someone from the army came to recruit, and I also hope to join the Red Army. At the same time, I also hope to be by your side. I also went to register, and today the military informed me that I can go to the Minsk government for review. I think I should be able to pass. I don't know what unit I will be assigned to, but I pray that I can be assigned to you. I look forward to meeting you in the military. Love your Natalia, April 29, 1941, this silly girl. I feel uneasy inside. During my time at the Pramer training camp, to be honest, I have heard a lot about war. Basically, all the station troops around Minsk know that the Germans are mobilizing a large number of troops to the border. As long as they are not blind or foolish, they know that the Germans intend to launch a war, but no one knows exactly when. Even I know that war can kill people, but why did Natasha, this foolish girl, rush to join the army at this time? Sigh. My mood was extremely complicated, and I didn't want to eat anymore, so I walked out of the house. Along the way, I took an aimless walk, but before I knew it, I arrived at Natalia's doorstep. Without hesitation, I immediately knocked on her door. Natasha. Natasha. Are you at home? After a while, the sound of opening the door came from inside. I saw that it was Natalia's mother, with red circles around his eyes, as if she had cried before. Hello madam, may I ask if Natasha is at home? The woman glanced at me in my military uniform and shouted hysterically. Go away. I don't welcome you, you have taken away my only daughter. What else do you want? She burst into tears and slammed the door shut. Madam, please don't misunderstand. I am Andrei, Natasha's good friend. What happened? Can you tell me something? I still stood at the door unwilling to leave. Natalia's mother said to me in a crying voice inside. At noon today, the military said that Natalia met the recruitment criteria and was taken away by them. I quickly asked. Madam, do you know where Natalia was taken? Has she mentioned anything related to it to you? I don't know, how can you take away my only daughter? She's the only one I have in this world. Crying came from the tightly closed door, and I decided not to disturb her anymore. Then he went downstairs. As I walked along the road, I kept reminiscing about the days I used to be with Natasha. Now, I don't even know where she was. In such a big city and army, where can I find you? You must be safe and sound. My heart was like a reddened steel immersed in ice water, instantly cooling down. The air was filled with the fragrance of violet flowers, and the streets were filled with laughter from children playing and laughing. As I walked on the sidewalk, a little girl walked over and grabbed my pants legs, saying, Red Army brother, the Germans are calling. Can you protect us? I don't want to die. I crouched down and looked into her eyes, saying. Who told you these things? The Germans won't fight, you won't die, you'll live well. Alexei and Ilya, they said the adults were saying that the Germans would come over, and they also said that we should pack up and leave here quickly. Don't believe them, the Soviet Red Army will definitely protect you, protect the Soviet Union from anyone's invasion, and I won't let the Germans cross the border half a step. Red Army brother, I believe you, little girl, what's your name? My name is Yekaterina Ivanovich Ivanov. Okay, little Kajia. It's already so late, go home quickly. Where is your home? I'll take you home. It's right next to Pavlovich Avenue. Okay, let me take you home. As I spoke, the little girl picked up my hand and I smiled, taking her back to her house. Goodbye, Red Army brother. May the Lord bless you. Goodbye, you too. After seeing her home, I rushed back home. The next noon, I found Oleg and walked with him to our supply station in Minsk. We then boarded the supply truck and returned to the Pramer training camp. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Darkness is coming soon. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Darkness is coming soon. On the way back to the Pramer training camp, my heart was always worried about Natalia. I don't know where she is now, and whether she will be assigned to a place very close to the border. I prayed, if she is really hired by the army, don't be transferred to the border. The current situation is becoming increasingly severe, and it seems that the Red Army headquarters is also aware of the seriousness of the problem. Trucks are driving on the streets of Minsk, and there are clearly more soldiers on the streets. Groups of soldiers with live ammunition are walking in line on the streets, and the walls are covered with recruitment posters. In the distance, black smoke emanates from the chimney of Minsk Machinery Factory. In Minsk, there aren't as many regular garrisons as there are. These troops should have been transferred from elsewhere. Oleg looked at the rows of troops marching in neat steps outside and said, "Andrei, have you gone back to see Natasha?" Oleg asked unintentionally, poking my worries. "Hey. That silly girl Natasha. She also went to join the army. Today, she left me a letter saying that she registered at the conscription office and passed it. Let's go home first," and she left behind. Oleg was surprised. Obviously, she didn't expect a quiet and beautiful girl like Natalia to join the army, but he saw my concern and sat over, patting my shoulder and saying, "It's okay, brother. People from the conscription office usually don't send female soldiers to the front line. Have you seen any girls wearing military uniforms near Pramir?" He lit a cigarette and turned his head to joke. "If you see a girl wearing military uniform, you have to call me out." I gave him a bitter smile. "Where do you think we will go after training?" I asked Oleg. "There is a high probability that they will join the Western Army and go to the border. What are you doing there?" "Sitting at a table with Germans for lunch." I asked intentionally. Oleg stamped out the cigarette butt and said with a smile, "There is a high possibility that Germans will entertain you with bullets and shells." I laughed and said, "If there really is a war, are you afraid?" At that time, there's nothing to be afraid of. If that group of Germans really attacked, the land under our feet would definitely not be as soft as France. He stomped on the ground with his foot, crushing the remaining black ashes and tobacco from his cigarette butt. A thick layer of dust on the floor of the carriage buried the ashes. Soviet men were shot with real weapons, not flirted with women. "You're becoming more and more like a mad cow. Those who are close to Zhu are red, those who are close to Mo are black." Haha. Where is Colonel Victor from? I hear his accent. He doesn't seem to be a native of Minsk. I wondered. He seems to be from Zabinka near Brest, but I'm not sure where he is. Anyway, his home is in that area. He was previously the commander of a tank regiment of the Red Army's Western Front, and was later transferred to Minsk to train tank soldiers. It is said that he took the initiative to train tank soldiers and personally came over to take command. It seems that Mad Cow still has a lot of foresight. I sighed. The truck pulled a trail of smoke and dust out of the city, heading towards the Pramir training camp. The training camp was still filled with the smell of diesel and gunpowder as before, which was strange. The aroma and floral scent emanating from the bread oven in Minsk did not make me feel at ease, but rather made me feel a bit nervous. When the strong smell of diesel and gun smoke from the Pramir training camp hit me, my heart was very calm and full of strength. Aha! Look who's here. Our ace tank hero has returned from their little girlfriend's side. Colonel Anatoly jumped off a tank that we couldn't name in the tank yard, and a young man with a face full of oil stains emerged from the entrance of the tank turret. Skipan quickly waved to us, gesturing for us to go and take a look. "Andrei. Oleg. Come and take a look at the new toy you just pulled back." The sergeant walked towards us and we quickly saluted. He gestured for us to finish the ceremony. Colonel Victor requested a batch of new tanks, T-34, from the command center today. They have just been replaced from other units and are of good quality. You guys will repair your tanks later, and when the others return, notify them to be like you. Oleg and I ran happily towards the T-34 tank that Skipan had crawled into. "Hey! Why did you come back so late?" "Now, this girl belongs to me," Skipan joked. Oleg and I excitedly poked our heads into the tank compartment, hoping to see what our new toys looked like inside. Yesterday afternoon, Colonel Victor returned from a meeting at the command center and a team of these tanks drove into the Pramir training camp, said Stepan, pointing to several T-34 tanks next to him that had slightly rusted appearances. The T-26 tank we trained on before was a bit tight compared to the newly arrived T-34 tank. Whether in terms of artillery caliber or volume, it was far better than the T-26 light tank. Although it was an excellent tank, it surpassed the T-26 light tank in just the above two aspects. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, soldiers who went out to visit relatives returned to the primer training camp one after another. The new tanks in front of them also surprised them immensely. Everyone worked hard to repair the tanks and worked until 11 o'clock in the evening. Only then did everyone return to the camp to rest. At night, after finishing our busy work, Oleg and Skipin sat on the tank turret, watching the scattered lights in the distant city of Minsk. At this moment, our hearts were all incredibly secure and full of strength. A gentle breeze carried the fragrance of violets from Minsk to our oily faces, as if our mother's hand was caressing our faces. We stared blankly at the scattered lights in Minsk in the distance, everyone quiet and with their own thoughts. I am constantly thinking of Natasha in my heart. We all know that the Germans intended to launch a war, but at what time, where, what weather, and how many troops they had, we are completely ignorant. The entire city is shrouded in a false peace, but there is already smoke rising from within. We only know that there is an evil hand waiting to cross the border, and behind it lies endless darkness, while we are the lightning that cuts through the night. We will never let the war burn to Minsk. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Reserve Team. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8 Reserve Team. The next day, May 4th, is Sunday. Colonel Victor, the mad cow, went to the headquarters early this morning, and Colonel Anatoly did not give us any orders. After experiencing the bumps on the military supply truck yesterday and the fatigue of repairing the Campin T.34 tank at night, we all slept soundly until around 8 a.m. when I smelled a very strong odor. As soon as I opened my eyes, I understood what was going on. Oleg. Can you change his mother foot binding? His mother people will be suffocated. I suddenly sat up and shouted to Oleg, who was frantically shaking the dirty foot wrap with my hands, towards the bed beside me. Yeah. You're still fucking shaking your foot binding. As if you were afraid that others might not smell your charming taste. On the other side of the bed, Skipin closed his eyes and muttered. Hee hee. You're still asleep. Later, Master Anatoly will come in. I think my foot binding should be gentler than him. Ha ha ha, Oleg said with a wicked smile. Hurry up and stuff your foot wrap and feet into those damn boots. Scott no longer closed his eyes and jumped up from the bed. Hee 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 hee. It seems that the fool has lost his temper. Fool. Do you want to taste the taste of the foot wrap? Give it a try. Ha. As he spoke, Thorn held one end of the rectangular foot wrap and threw it at Skipin. Skipin quickly turned his head and dodged Thorn's foot wrap attack. You bastard. I must kill you today. Skipin jumped to the ground and picked up the foot binding hanging on the side to fight with Thorn. I laughed so hard that I couldn't close my mouth. Brothers, it's almost time for the exercise class. Don't sleep in any longer. Oleg pressed Skipin under him and shouted to the people still sleeping soundly in the tent. Skipin seized the opportunity to overturn Oleg and turn the attack around. Hee hee. Now it's your turn to taste the scent of the foot binding. As he spoke, Skipin pressed the foot binding against Oleg's nose. Ah, ah. Stop making trouble, I surrender, I surrender. Skipin stood up satisfied and pulled up Oleg, who was lying on the ground. And Oleg had to obediently put on his boots. In the morning, after having a simple breakfast in the cafeteria, we began to continue yesterday's maintenance. We were able to carefully inspect the T.34 tank that we couldn't observe yesterday this morning. The T.34 medium tank parked in front of us has a dark green camouflage color overall, a trapezoidal shape, a flat welded turret, and a cannon with a caliber larger than the T-26 light tank. The deep black burn marks at the muzzle indicate that many shells have been fired from its barrel. The tracks and load-bearing wheels are slightly rusted. Skipin brought the repair tools, and we all took out the necessary tools and began to overhaul our new toys. I was very interested in the artillery of this tank, so I first climbed into the turret to check the condition of the artillery. The L11.76.2/30.5 field gun, engraved on the nameplate outside the gun bolt, displays detailed information about the gun. It was assembled on July 12, 1940 at the Kharkiv factory. It seems that this gun is quite new. I pulled the bolt handle and looked at the rifling from inside the gun barrel, but there was not much wear. I observed that the entire vehicle can hold around 70 shells. If the ammunition is fully loaded, the turret will be very narrow and crowded. But there is a lot of space inside the car, and there is a dedicated seat in my seat. Although the leather cushion of that seat seems to have a hole, I think it may be a thorn on the buttocks of the previous gunner. The optical observation device in front of me is clear and flexible to operate. The T.34 medium tank is equipped with a dedicated technician seat at the front of the body, which cannot be compared to the T-26 light tank. However, there seems to be no radio station installed on the technician side, but a rack is reserved to support the radio device. It is unclear whether the previous drivers of this tank were stingy and dismantled, or whether the tank was not installed when it was manufactured. In addition, the mechanic is equipped with a 7.62mm DTM machine gun in front of him, and there is also a dedicated rack in the lower right corner of the mechanic's position for storing DTM machine gun magazines. Overall, I think this tank has no major issues except for some flaws in its appearance. I poked my head out of the turret, and Oleg and Skipin were replacing a component in the engine compartment. Damn it! How did they maintain tanks before, and the air filters are almost becoming the home of mice. Thorn took out a cylindrical filter from the engine compartment, which was covered in dust and some grass leaves. Feeling angry, he threw the filter to the ground. It seems that I need to change my previous thoughts, I muttered to myself. Skipan, do you still have a new air filter in the toolbox? Skipan jumped off the tank and began searching for the air filter. There is no more compatible model. Only the air filter that is compatible with the GAZT-26 engine is available, but I feel that this may be slightly smaller than it, and the interface thread should not fit properly. Skipin held up a smaller air filter and shook his hand at Oleg, who was squatting next to the T.34 engine compartment, saying, "Damn it! I can only wash and use that old and broken air filter. The person who used this tank before was definitely a fool, and a fool who couldn't even drive a tractor. My grandmother must be better at driving a tractor than him." Oleg jumped out of the tank in frustration, picked up the air filter he had just dropped on the ground, and walked towards the well. "Can this tank really be driven?" I sat on the turret and asked Stepan, who was walking by. "It should be possible to drive, but it may break down halfway through." It seems that we were all happy for nothing. "The tank looks fine outside, but it's really a mess inside." Scott looked at the engine compartment and shook his head, saying, "Didn't you come home the day before yesterday to take a look, Skipan?" "I'm going back, it's at the Wafkovis collective farm not far from here." "How is your family doing?" "Everything is fine, both my father and mother are working, and my younger brother is studying." Having a younger brother is really nice, but unfortunately, I am the only child in my family. If I had a younger brother, I would definitely protect him everywhere and he would definitely admire me. Upon hearing this, Skipin smiled and said, "He's only 9 years old, he knows something." In the following weeks, we focused on the Kampin T.43 tank. After several major repairs, the engine part of the tank was able to run smoothly. We also brushed the paint color of the tank again, and in the end, it was just like new. One morning, around June 20th, Colonel Victor, the Thmad Cow, went to the command center for a meeting. When he returned at noon, he gathered us together and read out a document to us. Pay attention. Gather. Colonel Anatoly blew his whistle lightly, which frightened me and made me jump off the turret. We tank soldiers who were maintaining tanks immediately jumped out of the tanks upon hearing the whistle and stood in front of a neat row of T.34 tanks on the tank field, forming a queue. After Colonel Anatoly organized his team, he reported it to Colonel Victor on the side. Colonel Comrade. All soldiers from the Prammer Tank Soldier Training Camp have gathered. The colonel saluted, "Okay, Comrade Colonel." Then Colonel Victor walked to the front of the queue and took out a document to read. According to the instructions of the Supreme Command of the Red Army to the Western Front Command of the Red Army, it was ordered that the Northern Front Army, Western Front Army, Northwest Front Army, Southwest Front Army, as well as the directly affiliated units of the Front Army, and militia units strengthen their personnel construction. The reserve forces of each group army were ordered to prepare for the backup, and the preparation period was from May 1 to June 20, 1941. Colonel Victor said after reading the document. Dear Red Army soldiers, after 2 months of tank soldier training, you have now mastered basic tank control skills. You have become a proud Red Army tank soldier. Now, the Germans have gathered a large number of troops on the border, and we do not know what they want to do, nor do we want to know what they want to do. The leaders of the Soviet Supreme Command have already realized this. In order to prevent possible wars and deter those who intend to launch wars, the Red Army's Western Front Command has issued us combat readiness instructions to travel to the western border as a reserve force for the Group Army. Now, we belong to the 10th Group Army of the Red Army's Western Front Army. The reserve team of the Red Army, tomorrow, you will end your training and head to the area near Bialystok to be incorporated into the 10th Group Army of the Western Front Army, here. I also want to tell everyone. The 10th Group Army is my mother unit, and before I came, I promised all the officers around me. I will bring them a group of the best and bravest tank soldiers from the entire Soviet Union. I believe. Everyone present, there is more than enough. After Colonel Victor finished speaking, he instructed Colonel Anatoly to prepare us and set off in the afternoon. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Vehicle Commander. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9 Vehicle Commander. After lunch, we were ready to set off for Slonim on the banks of the Neman River west of Minsk, where the 10th Group Army Tank 7th Division of the Soviet Red Army's Western Army was stationed. Our campsite is located between Minsk City and Slovenia, not far from Slovenia. We set off from the campsite around 1 p.m. and arrived at Slovenia's base in 4 hours along the road. The 7th Tank Division is stationed in a village, with rows of tanks neatly lined up next to the village, mainly BT.7 and T.26 tanks. When our brand new T.34 tanks entered the stationed area, the 7th Tank Division's gunners sitting on the tanks stared blankly at the T.34 tanks passing by. We parked the tanks in a nearby open space, and Colonel Victor, the mad cow, walked out of the command center located in the village with a team of tank men dressed in black jumpsuit uniforms, just like us. Comrades, they are the most experienced tank fighters of the 7th Tank Division, having experienced the baptism of the Finnish battlefield. Now they will lead you tank soldiers who have just enlisted and have not yet seen the battlefield. Mad cow, Colonel Victor said to us. Across from us are corporals who are slightly older than us in the past decade, and their eyes exude an elusive light. Now all the T.34 tank fleets that have just come out of the training camp are here, with vacant positions reserved for their commanders. These reserve team recruits are completely incapable of independent combat. If they are sent to the battlefield, they will be sent to death. Therefore, comrades can only be asked to serve as the commanders of these reserve teams and command them in battle. You can choose the appropriate fleet and lead them. Train them. Mad cow, Colonel Victor turned around and said to the team of corporals he had brought with him. The 10 or so corporals wearing tank soldier uniforms stained with oil scattered and observed the T.34 tanks, standing in line with us in front of the tanks. We and the T.34 tank behind us are like goods on shelves, left to be chosen by these few corporals. Among them, a corporal with burned scars on his face walked up to us, stopped, glanced at us, and then looked at the T.34 tank behind us. He walked over, jumped onto the tank, opened the hatch, drilled in, and closed the hatch. We thought he was going to start the tank, so we quickly dodged from the tank. After a while, he opened the hatch, lay down on the turret, took out a cigarette from his arms, and started smoking. Your tank is well maintained, but it lacks necessary components. We looked at each other in confusion. Where are you from? We spoke in unison. Minsk people, he laughed. Ha ha ha. Are you guys brothers? You look so alike, you even speak the same way. No, Comrade Corporal, we're not brothers. We're operating this T.34 tank together. The corporal took a puff of smoke. When you enter this damn tank, you are one person, you are damn brothers, even better than brothers. He threw away his cigarette butt, jumped off the tank, and came to us. My name is Anton Mikhail Mihailovich. He extended his calloused and sturdy hand to introduce himself to us all. Andrei, hello Comrade Corporal. Oleg, hello Comrade Corporal. Hello, Sergeant. Then he shouted loudly. He made a funny face and startled us. Ha ha ha. Damn it. What are you doing so seriously? This is a damn tank camp. I'm not confessing to the priest. You damn idiots, new recruits. Ha ha ha. We looked at each other, and the person who was just serious suddenly turned into this. He laughed comically, while we were really like a group of idiots. Alright, damn new recruits, now you have to follow my command. Stand up quickly. He speaks with the word death in every sentence, as if he really likes to say it. I don't know why he likes this word so much. In the days to come, I estimate that he has said at least tens of millions of things related to death. After a while, these corporal all chose their own fleet and joined the queue. Okay, everyone has chosen their own fleet. So, all the soldiers who have just come out of the Pramer training camp, you must obey the orders and management of these veterans. From now on, you will live together. As he spoke, he took out a document from his map bag and saluted us, reading, according to the instructions of the Soviet Red Army's Western Front Command to the new reserve team, your official designation is Tank 1st Battalion of the 7th Division of the Mechanized 6th Army Tank of the 10th Group Army of the Soviet Red Army's Western Front, with Viktor Mikhail Mikhailov as the commander. Effective date: June 20, 1941. I observed the new car captain next to us. He seems to often fall into contemplation. Often, the first sentence you talk to him happily, and the next sentence he inexplicably quieted down, his eyes seemingly staring at a place in a daze. When you think he won't talk to you anymore, he starts muttering some puzzling things from his mouth. I am very puzzled about this. He always hums some strange tunes. When we ask him, "What are you singing?" he will say, "Aha. You damn fool. Why stop?" In summary, apart from these, we found him very interesting. He was about 3 or 4 years older than us, but he never put on an elder-like appearance or a proud official demeanor. Therefore, the next day, we became people who could share the same bag of tobacco with him. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. The Burning World. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. The Burning World. The next day, on June 21, we officially became soldiers of the 10th Army Group stationed at the border. I, Oleg, and Skipin were also awarded the rank of Private First Class. In the morning, when maintaining tanks, the latest political news was played on the radio next to us. The German Air Force's military operation in Greece has already occupied the entire Greek island of Crete. In the battle, a large number of Greek civilians, the Greek Resistance Army, and the British coalition, participated in the fight against German airborne forces, causing heavy losses for both sides. Greece was fully occupied by Germany, Italy, and Bulgaria on June 12. Regarding whether the war on the Balkan Peninsula would affect the Soviet Union, the Supreme Command of the Great Soviet Union has not yet made an evaluation of this incident. In early June, in Asia, the Chinese military suffered consecutive defeats and retreated toward South Asia. Japan dispatched several batches of bombers to bomb the location of the Chinese nationalist government, Chongqing. The indiscriminate bombing by the Japanese Air Force resulted in the death of a large number of urban residents, and a large number of urban infrastructure buildings were destroyed during the bombing. Regarding Japan's deployment of troops in the Far East region of the Soviet Union and the troops it invested in the Chinese battlefield, Japan lacks the ability to pose a threat to the territory of the Soviet Union. The Red Army soldiers of the Far East Front will always protect every precious inch of the great Soviet Union's territory. TASS reported in Vladivostok the radio played the news with electromagnetic interference, and Oleg fiddled with the engine. He seemed to dislike listening to these messages. "Andrei, turn off the radio. Playing these things every day makes the world really chaotic. Wars are breaking out all over the world now, people are dying everywhere, and wives and children are scattered everywhere. Sigh. I hate war. Where hasn't war happened yet?" I jokingly said, "There hasn't been any war there. I think it should be our great Soviet Union and the United States of America over there." I leaned against the car and looked up at him. "Hey hey. Can the United States be on par with the Soviet Union? You little bourgeois. You should have called the Ministry of Internal Affairs to investigate you." As he spoke, he threw the oily cloth at me, and I jumped onto the tank and started arguing with him. Skipan giggled foolishly on the side. Hee. "Hurry up and kill that capitalist lackey. Ha ha ha. Use force. Ha ha ha." Anton still crouched beside the radio, listening to the poor signal accompanied by a rustling sound, lost in thought. Britain was attacked by an air raid in London, Germany, with a hiss. Da-da-da-da-da. Da-da-da-da-da-da. Da-da. Woo-woo-woo-woo. Woo. The noise coming from the radio made Skipan unable to bear it, so he rushed towards the radio, wanting to turn it off. However, Anton remained there, seemingly listening attentively. He stopped Stepan, who came to turn off the radio, and made a gesture to stop the sound. Stepan was stunned for a moment, looking at Anton in confusion. Anton started adjusting the frequency knob of the noisy radio, and the announcer's voice gradually disappeared, while the noise became more and more obvious. In the end, it was almost like the dense sound of power generation in the command center. Dee-dee-dee-dee. 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 Dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee. This sound is densely intertwined, as if a large group of people are whispering. Oleg and I, who were playing on the tank, also stopped and looked at the strange radio. Can this be the rhythm of the radio station's announcements or the noise? Stepan nervously asked from the side. However, Anton remained silent and continued to listen carefully to the chaotic frequencies on the radio, appearing to be understandable. However, after a while, the chaotic sounds on the radio gradually disappeared and were replaced by music from Moscow radio station. "It's just electromagnetic interference, isn't there still a song playing here?" He patted Anton's back and said with a smile. Anton stood up, his eyes still fixed on the radio. Muttered in his mouth. "I hope so." The radio was playing the most popular music in Moscow, and with a cheerful rhythm, our nervous mood gradually relaxed. But the relaxed atmosphere didn't last for a while. The roar of airplane engines came from the sky, sounding like it was coming from above the western forest. Then, a black dot appeared from the towering tree top. Our nervousness was once again lifted, and the black spot seemed to be heading towards us. A soldier took out his telescope and looked at the black spot, shouting, "German planes! German planes!" Oleg quickly picked up the DTM machine gun that had just been removed from the car next to him, and Skipan also threw him a magazine, clack clack. With a sharp sound, the bullets loaded into the barrel. I quickly raised my hands and helped him prop up the muzzle. Oleg's DTM machine gun followed the flight path of the German plane firmly, while I closed my eyes and prepared to welcome the deafening gunfire and firelight at any time, ready to shoot down the plane of unknown origin. The people around quickly put on airstrikes to prepare for air defense when they saw this situation. Anton signaled us not to act rashly for now. That black dot flew towards us for a while, then turned around and turned back the same way. At this moment, Colonel Victor also hurried to the tank farm and shouted, "Do not allow indiscriminate firing into the air." We watched as the black left. Damn it. How do border guards defend against air? German planes are almost flying to Minsk. Oleg put down his machine gun and said angrily. It's not the fault of the Soviet border guards. Now, the Soviet-German border is like an explosive barrel, only one spark away from igniting this dangerous explosive barrel. In fact, the Germans really want you to shoot his plane, so he has a reason to attack the Soviet Union like he did attacking France. Anton lit a cigarette and said. These bastards, they want to attack the Soviet Union. Go to his mother's dream, try it. Let me blow his head off. Oleg spat up and said. I looked at the plane, it was flying farther and farther, but its speed was indeed very slow, like taking a walk in my own garden, and even had a lingering feeling. Imagine a stranger casually entering your home, wandering around and looking at your wife and daughter. You can understand our feelings at that time. The atmosphere became tense once again, with the cheerful sound of songs accompanying the tense atmosphere appearing unusually abrupt, and everyone's hearts were filled with anger. Now the whole world is fighting, and wherever a war passes, it will be a dead end. If the Germans want to bring the flames of war to the Soviet Union, we will never allow such a thing to happen. Anton looked at the gradually disappearing German plane and muttered, in this world on fire, if you want to prevent the fire from burning on you, you can only extinguish the fire, completely extinguish it, leaving no embers, no spark. Only then can you protect yourself. End of this chapter.